Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you are on the West Coast. Thank you all for joining us today for our Surviving Survivorship webinar in partnership with Count Me In. My name is Zach Getty, and I am the Education Manager here at Fight CRC. Fight Colorectal Cancer is the leading patient empowerment and advocacy organization in the United States, providing balanced and objective information on colon and rectal cancer research, treatment, and policy. We are relentless champions of hope, focused on funding high-impact research endeavors while equipping advocates to influence legislation and policy for the collective good. Before we get started with today's webinar, I do have a couple of housekeeping items to go through. If you've watched one of these before, you know I always go through this little spiel at the beginning, so bear with me here. We will have some dedicated time at the end of this webinar for general questions, but for this webinar specifically, please feel free to use the Q&A panel at the right side of your screen to ask any questions that come up along the way. We will do our best to address them during the webinar. This event is meant to educate as well as serve as a forum for you to ask your questions and start conversation. So please don't be shy. None of us bite. We're happy to answer any questions you have, and we will do our best to answer any and all questions that are asked. We will have a recording of this webinar available on our site within the next few days. If you registered, you will receive that direct link via email, as well as any follow-up information that we discuss during the actual webinar. We will also provide a transcript of this webinar on our site for those of you that would prefer to read the information discussed today. Also, feel free to tweet along with us. Is it still called tweeting? I'm not sure. You can use the hashtag CRC webinar to tweet along with us during this webinar. Please remember to stop by our website at fightcrc.org to check out all of our patient and caregiver resources. We offer a variety of free-to-use online tools, such as our clinical trial finder, which provides a curated list of colorectal cancer-specific clinical trials curated from clinicaltrials.gov. We also offer our patient provider finder, which allows you to search for providers in your area with experience and expertise in treating CRC. If you're looking for a second opinion or just looking for a provider, it's a great place to start. And then we also offer Chat CRC, which is our one-of-a-kind interactive tool that can answer your questions about colorectal cancer and related topics. It's available on our website, or if you'd prefer, you can text it at 1-318-242-8272, which is spells Chat CRC, for those familiar with the letters that attach to the numbers on your phone. There's also our free Community of Champions app, where you can connect with other people in the colorectal cancer community and keep in touch with Fight CRC and know what we're up to. And we also offer an assortment of free print and digital educational resources. They're all free to request and download. If you take a look at our store, if you find something, let us know and we'll send it to you. I have a quick disclaimer. The information and services provided by Fight Colorectal Cancer are for general informational purposes only. The information and services are not intended to be substitutes for professional medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment. If you are ill or suspect that you're ill, please see a doctor immediately. In an emergency, always call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room. Fight Colorectal Cancer never recommends or endorses any specific physicians, products, or treatments for any condition. Okay, now with all of that out of the way, I would like to briefly introduce our panelists. So joining us today, we have Dr. Kimmie Ng of the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, Division of Gastrointestinal Oncology. We also have Wenora Johnson, Stage 3 survivor and advocate. JJ Singleton, Stage 4 survivor and advocate. And joining us also is Zoe Geary, who is the Manager of Community Engagement at Count Me In. So I would like to hand this off for just a moment to Dr. Ng, Wenora, and JJ to provide a little bit more thorough background about themselves, and then we will get into the actual webinar. So Dr. Ng, I will start with you. If you'd like to introduce yourself a little more thoroughly than I have, feel free.
Thank you so much, and it's such an honor to be here. I'm looking forward to having a great discussion with everybody here. So I am a medical oncologist at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and I care for patients with all types of gastrointestinal malignancies, but specialize in colorectal cancer. And recently, when we started seeing more and more young people with being diagnosed with colorectal cancer, I founded our Young Onset Colorectal Cancer Center here in March 2019. So again, it's looking forward to talking to you all.
Thanks so much. Wenora, would you like to give us a little bit more of your background?
Sure, absolutely. And like Dr. Ng, it is a pleasure to be here and to discuss survivorship and just how important and valuable it is to all of us. So again, my name is Wenora Johnson. I'm a three-time cancer survivor. I was diagnosed with stage 3B colorectal cancer in 2011, and following genetic testing, which stated that I was actually positive for Lynch syndrome, I developed two additional cancers. That was endometrial and basal cell carcinoma, all tied to that Lynch syndrome status. But the one thing I am also is that I'm a mom, I'm a grandmother, I'm a colleague for those that I work with, I'm a Navy veteran. And I guess I'm going to say my favorite and most is I'm just a very passionate patient advocate.
Thank you. JJ, would you like to introduce yourself a little more thoroughly?
And yes, as both said before, it's an honor to be here. My name is JJ Singleton. I'm from near Asheville, North Carolina. Unfortunately, everybody's heard about that now. But I was diagnosed at 27 with colorectal cancer back in 2015, so almost a decade. It was stage 2 then. It came back within a year to stage 4, and I'm considered incurable as of right now. So I've been on treatment ever since. And that's led me into learning about survivorship with incurable cancer and ongoing treatment, and led me into the advocacy space where I found, it's helped me deal with the whole survivorship. But again, it's an honor to be here and discuss everything.
Thank you, JJ. So I'd like to just go ahead and get started with Dr. Ng and what she has experienced as a physician with patients in survivorship. And I do want to take a second and point out that there may be even some confusion about what survivorship means. I know Fight CRC uses the term, you're a cancer survivor from the moment of your diagnosis. So I want to start out just with a quick question for Dr. Ng. Do you find that that is commonly how patients understand it, or?
So I think it's a great point that a lot of people have very different definitions of what survivorship means, but I am in alignment with your definition that anyone diagnosed with cancer is surviving cancer and should be considered a survivor.
All right, thank you for the clarification. So, just generally, what can you speak to and challenges that patients face during survivorship? What have you seen?
Yeah, so just very quickly, I'll review some of the statistics about young onset colorectal cancer. So, as you all may have heard, it's been covered a lot in the media. Colorectal cancer overall is actually declining in incidence, and mortality rates are improving, largely due to improvements in screening and advances in treatment. But these benefits have not applied to the group of individuals under the age of 50, where we've seen a steady rise in both colon and rectal cancer in both men and women since the mid 1990s. And it's gotten so severe that actually colorectal cancer is now the leading cause of cancer death in young men under the age of 50. And so, with all this concern about the rising rates of young onset cancer, the US Preventive Services Task Force actually changed their recommendations around screening to lower the age at which to start from age 50 down to 45. So I think this shows you the magnitude of the problem and that unfortunately it is going to get worse if these increases continue. And so part of what we are trying to do here at our Young Onset Colorectal Cancer Center and in collaboration with cancer centers all around the world is try to understand what the underlying causes are. And we do think that those are mostly environmentally driven. But what we also are trying to do more research on is understanding the psychosocial needs and the experiences of these young patients who are being diagnosed with colorectal cancer, something that most people didn't expect at all at this young age. And so, as part of that, because we recognize that this group of young patients with colorectal cancer have very unique challenges compared to an older patient population with colorectal cancer, we were motivated to start our Young Onset Colorectal Cancer Center, as I mentioned, back in March 2019. We recognized that there was really no data out there about what the needs and experiences were of this unique group of patients. And so prior to designing the features and services and supports that went into our center, we conducted a focus group of young patients themselves as well as their caregivers to better understand what they went through as, they themselves or their loved one went through cancer, and what we needed to incorporate into our center to best support these patients and their loved ones. And so we published this paper in JCO Oncology Practice earlier this year. The first author is Kaylin Fletcher, in case anyone wanted to read it. But what we found was 4 primary themes that affected all young patients with colorectal cancer. 1, feeling overwhelmed by the healthcare system and the need for navigation, because most of you young people have not had any experience with the healthcare system prior because you were previously healthy. The second was isolation and the need for caregiver and patient peer support. The third was life disruption, having to juggle many different roles at this unique stage in life and the need for psychosocial support. And the last was enthusiasm about participating in research and having genetic testing done. And so with this information, we designed our center to absolutely have a patient navigator to help our young patients newly diagnosed, and also to have dedicated social workers who have experience with young patients, specifically with colorectal cancer. And, speaking to the need for community and this sense of isolation, I think a lot of you may have felt as you sit in the waiting rooms of cancer centers that you're really surrounded by so many older individuals. And so our center really felt a need to provide a community for our young patients going through this illness. And so we do educational workshops. We have an annual patient and family forum where young patients can get together and their caregivers can get together and really share what they've been going through. We have regular newsletters to really let people know that they're not alone in this journey. And we have support groups specifically for young onset colorectal cancer patients. And because we do know, although everyone is a survivor, the survivorship concerns of a stage 1, 2, and 3 patient may be very different than the survivorship concerns of a stage 4 patient. We did divide those 2 groups up into separate support groups, so it's a really safe place to share what they're going through and help each other get through this really tough time. And so, I think that this is a really important thing to be able to offer to our patients. There are many studies out there of adolescent and young adult patients, the AYA population, but it doesn't include the majority of our young patients with colorectal cancer, most of whom are in their 40s, and really the sandwich generation. Right? Many of them have children under the age of 18 who are really primary concerns of theirs as they're going through this diagnosis. Many are also taking care of their parents and the older generation. So this is a really difficult time to be hit with a diagnosis as serious as colorectal cancer. And I do think that is unique to young onset colorectal cancer compared to other young adult cancers. The other things that are unique to this population are body image, right? So many of our patients have ostomies, and just think about how different that is and the impact of that on body image. And we definitely try to provide a community to share those concerns with and help our patients through that very difficult thing. And then finally, having bowel symptoms, whether from surgery or radiation or the very many treatments that we often put our patients through. That is another really unique thing about colorectal cancer specifically. And so, I see my patients struggle with these all the time. And so we work really hard to provide supports and resources and care needs for these people to help them through these very unique concerns. Some other things that I see that are really common themes and that I'm sure JJ and Wenora will really bring to life for you in terms of their own experiences are, one of the most difficult things is that life seems to be moving on all around you, right? And, meanwhile, you're dealing with this very, very serious cancer. Your peers are, advancing in their careers, many are expanding their families. And so I think that is a really difficult thing for a lot of our patients to cope with. And also another theme that I've noticed is what I call re-entry into the real world. So for those patients who do finish treatment, all of a sudden they're kind of discharged to the real world with less frequent visits with their doctor, and everyone around them thinking that they're just going to go back to normal now because treatment is finished, but nothing is ever normal again after having a cancer diagnosis and going through treatment. And so we really try our best to also provide support around that. And, I'm curious about JJ and Wenora's experiences with a lot of these factors. And, to try to even better provide interventions to help our young patients, we are trying to do the research to fill the gaps in our knowledge about what the psychosocial needs are of this patient population and how we can best support them through all stages of survivorship. So in addition to all the research I mentioned about trying to understand what the underlying biology and causes of young onset colorectal cancer are, we are also doing a lot of psychosocial research. So for example, we have a survivorship navigation pilot project right now, where instead of waiting until someone is 5 years out from finishing their cancer treatment, we navigate patients to our survivorship program right after they've finished their adjuvant therapy. And so, you then can start planning your survivorship and your long-term goals much, much earlier and get the medical attention you need for complications of treatment much earlier than the traditional ways of referring people to survivorship. And the other large effort that we're trying to do is we're creating a long-term running psychosocial data repository, which just means asking patients to fill out questionnaires every so frequently throughout their cancer treatment and their surveillance that ask them about their emotions, their mental health, how they're doing with parenting, their prognostic awareness about, their expected life expectancy and their survivorship, and trying to build upon some data so that we can really develop curated interventions to help our patients better get through and meet all of these very unique challenges that affect particularly this young population. So I think that I'll just end there and happy to answer any questions, but I'm sure people are most curious to hear JJ and Wenora speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have a quick question. You mentioned several times psychosocial support. Can you explain that in layman's terms, what that involves?
Yeah, so there is so much existential distress with receiving a cancer diagnosis. There may be depression, there may be anxiety, there may be mental health and other emotional issues that patients need professional help with to navigate through their treatment. And so we provide that support in a variety of different ways. One is through social workers who meet with patients regularly, and ours have special expertise in young patients with colorectal cancer. We also have psychiatrists. So in case there is a need for medications to help with depression or anxiety, we make sure that we have a team to take care of our patients in that way. And then very importantly, peer support. So many of our young patients want to connect with other young patients who are going through similar experiences and who may be receiving similar treatments. So we have a one-to-one program too that matches young patients up with another young patient for that peer support. And then we have the group support through the support groups that I mentioned to, again, provide that extra layer of, therapy really for all the emotional and psychological concerns that patients have as they get this diagnosis.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. So like you said, I'm sure people are interested in hearing JJ's and Wenora's experiences with this. I'm just going to take a stab at it. And JJ, I'm going to start with you if you don't mind. Can you speak to any of this, the challenges that Dr. Ng has described and kind of give us your take or what your experience has been? And I would like to remind everyone, please feel free to ask questions. Happy to not derail the conversation, but kind of interject with questions as they come up.
Yeah, I agree with almost everything that she said. It is such a complicated and individualized thing that survivorship is because we are all so different. I was 27 when I was diagnosed. I was the typical post-college guy, single, having fun with life, did not have health insurance, did not have a relationship or kids or anything. And then I was diagnosed with cancer. I live in such a rural and small area. 10 years later, I'm still the youngest person that I've ever seen in my cancer center.
Wow.
So there's such a divide and a like gap between there. The isolation comes into effect. And especially like I see myself as like my survivorship is like a very fluid thing. Some days I think I'm a really good survivor. Some days I don't think I can make it another day being a survivor because, as I said, mine's incurable. So I guess it looks different because I know the treatments are going to keep coming, and it's never a solid foundation. It's always like it could change. Like I know everybody thinks that too, but I guess when you go and you get the treatment every 3 weeks, you never know what's going to come back. And then just as you said, like every one of my friends, I feel like I relate closer to the people I knew at 27 than I do at 37 now because they all have kids. They all have multiple, jobs and advancements in their jobs. And I'm like, I've just been trying to survive each day the last 10 years. So I
Absolutely.
think survivorship really is just it's always going to be so individualized between your life. Like I know mine's completely different than somebody that's trying to be a survivor with kids or a survivor with a husband or a wife. And I think it's just important to realize that, and especially like the mental health and the everything from therapists to psychiatrists and stuff. That's changed my life going and getting help there because again, I come from an area where that's not really talked about either. I'm still looked at as weird as being a man that talks about that very openly in the Southern Appalachia area. So accepting that and doing that has helped me in my survivorship completely, and hopefully it can keep going in the right direction.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, like, we absolutely appreciate your willingness to come on here and talk about this kind of stuff. You mentioned, and I thought this was interesting. You said some days you wake up, you feel like you're a good survivor, and other days you don't.
Yeah.
How have you coped with that back and forth and managing the two extremes of that?
Very, very lucky to find organizations like Fight CRC and other groups of people and survivors that can, even if they can't relate completely, they understand. I say it all the time. I think all of us survivors are kind of on the same ride, but in a different seat. So we all have a different experience on this ride. And as if you have that shared experience, they can at least acknowledge what you're going through. So then
Sure.
I can, get that reinforcement because I deal with a lot of, very low self-confidence in those times. And that the reinforcement that people that see what I'm doing and see and know who I am, that kind of helps me.
Sure. Thank you. Wenora, can you speak at all to what you've experienced and how your experience, differs from what JJ has just talked about and how it's similar?
Absolutely. And first, can I say, JJ, you're such an inspiration. So never forget that. Because, you are speaking out. You are that voice that, the younger adult generation is looking at. And so for me, my story is a little bit different. I was 44 actually when I was diagnosed, under the age of 50 as well. And yet the caveat with mine is I have a genetic mutation which makes me acceptable the rest of my life, my entire life, for not just colorectal cancer to keep raising its head again, but multiple other cancers. And so for me, survivorship really means the act of surviving. And so for me, that means that it's actually invigorated me to figure out, how can I do this? How can I be better at this? And that great analogy that you used, JJ, about being on a ride, and we're all experiencing the ride in a different way. That's so true, because I didn't receive the psycho oncology care that is so prevalent and available today. What became my therapy is just sharing my story and talking to others and aligning myself with great organizations out there who truly want to help the patient. And so for me, surviving actually means that um, looking for ways to survive for me because of this genetic mutation means looking at clinical trials. So clinical trials has come into my life to keep me, let's say, hopeful. You inspire to be hopeful because you do want to live. And for me, it goes even a step further, because if I have Lynch syndrome, then my children have a 50% chance of being Lynch syndrome. And so if I can prevent them from going through this very journey that I've gone through, or at least give them a detour that's a safe and good detour, then that's what it's been about for me. So this survivorship journey includes the clinical trial of a hopeful vaccine that will help not just my family, but others as well.
So you mentioned, or you said, it sounds like you consider survivorship less of a state you found yourself in and more of an action that you've taken it upon yourself to, you are actively in survivorship, and survivorship is an action that you,
Survivorship mode, I call it. I'm in
survivorship mode. Do you,
constantly. And what it does is it constantly makes you think about, how can I survive this? How can um and then coming to terms with that, if by chance cancer does take your life, like it took the life of my younger brother 2 years ago at the age of 47, or my grandfather who passed away from colorectal cancer, then for me, that new initiative and drive is educate as many people as I can, um, help them understand and bring awareness around the importance of surveillance.
thank you. Dr. Ng, so you hear Wenora talk about being active, and same with JJ. Do you find that patients that are actively involved with their treatment and through survivorship have better outcomes, or generally fare better than those who kind of disengage and would withdraw?
Yeah, I absolutely think that younger patients, more than older patients, do demonstrate this passion for advocacy. And, what's amazing and why I love taking care of this group of patients so much is that they really, so many of them turn this very disruptive diagnosis in their life into something positive, right? And I think that came out in our focus group study about this enthusiasm about research and participation in research, because I do think so many of these young patients want to change the tide for future generations, whether it's their children or just other young people, so that no one else really has to go through this. And that dedication and commitment and passion is really inspiring to see, and I see it among so many of my young patients. I think, Wenora, what you spoke to about, early detection and education and awareness is so important. It is so important that everybody knows their family history, right? And if there is a family history, to get that genetic testing, because it can save lives if you can start screening earlier, if you do have a predisposition to getting this. And so, genetic testing, knowing your family history, knowing the symptoms to look out for, it's all so important and potentially life-saving for others.
Thank you. I am curious, to Wenora and JJ, have you found support or purpose in any unexpected places throughout your survivorship? I'm just going to use the word journey, but throughout survivorship.
I definitely would say, for me, it has been through organizations like Fight CRC, and then from there being directed through Fight CRC, and guided to other organizations like Count Me In, and even organizations outside of that realm. So what it does at the end of the day, it's given me hope that maybe, just maybe, we can really fight and try to beat this disease.
And yeah, same for me. I was first 5 years of my whole cancer thing, I was not into the advocacy. I purposely stayed away from doing stuff online, and then COVID hit and got sucked into it, and it's been a snowball kind of ever since. But the organizations and then social media for me, it led me to find one of the best friends in my entire life through cancer and stuff. So it's changed my life completely through there.
That's amazing. I
Yeah,
know.
I think it's called redefining your purpose for life. And when you redefine that purpose for life, at the end of the day, however that journey ends, I'm complete and happy that I gave it my all and my best.
So you say redefining purpose. Have you found that your priorities in life have changed since diagnosis for both of you?
Oh, Absolutely, absolutely. When I was first diagnosed, I was literally in the last 6 months of earning my master's degree. I was getting ready to go into my capstone program, and when cancer came knocking at the door, of course, I dropped everything at that moment to address cancer then. But then, as life, as you mentioned earlier, started kept going, they were like, well, you can come back to school, but that I totally lost the interest and the focus because now it meant that, wait, no, I have to keep, I have to keep going back for surveillance. I have to keep going back to various doctors. And then when genetic testing came along and said, well, not only do you have to keep going, but now you have Lynch syndrome, you're really going to have to keep going. And so that's changed my whole trajectory. And for me, what's just so vital, like I said, is this important information that we're doing today is sharing our journey, our story, where people can get information and educate themselves. And for me, particularly with family, I have two adult young ladies who I've been sharing this journey with along the way. And yet, the most difficult part as a mother is getting them to sign on to number one, getting genetically tested or to get a colonoscopy. They have yet to do that. And so, what I've had to learn is that I may not be the message bearer. That may come from a different source. But as their mom, I'm still there to help them with that torch if it comes to that point and they have to, get screened for cancer or cancer shows up. So recognizing that sometimes you may not be that 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 person that they're going to come to, but you can be ready for them when that time comes.
Absolutely.
And yeah, then for me, like cancer and then the whole survivorship thing has changed my life completely. Like it's opened my eyes to a lot bigger world than this like isolation of a small town that I've pretty much grew up in my whole life. Allowed me to see people in a different way and then just life in a different way in general than what I knew the first 27 years of my life. And that's one of the, I mean, there's many positives of, surviving and being alive and experiencing that, but that's one of the biggest ones that I've found in my life.
Interesting. Do you find that that's kind of helped you cope with your diagnosis and continued treatment as you go on? I know you mentioned earlier that you are on treatment for life. Has that been
Yeah,
difficult?
I think a lot of it is because I look back and I think I was always a pretty good person, but I think I'm a lot better of a human and a person, a friend, and everything now because of what I've been through and kind of
Mhm.
broadened my whole view and aspects of life. Because most people at 37 haven't been through 159 rounds of treatment or 10 surgeries or spent 90 days in the hospital and had to face this every day. But also, they don't know the amazing people that I've met through this. They're from all walks of life, from all, orientations and races and stuff. That's because I'm, like I said, very isolated Southern Appalachian town. Most people I live with are in a very, one track mind in there. And I'm different because I've lived this life. And that's one of the things I'm most proud of.
Sure.
And so Zach, can I interject just
Please, please.
really quickly there? And JJ, I want to say that's why it's so important that we celebrate milestones. And so it wasn't until, believe it or not, halfway through the year that I realized that it's been 10 years on this advocacy journey for me. And I'm like, wow, that's a milestone to be able to celebrate something other than, okay, I'm cancer free this number of years, but just a total different look at this journey altogether. That it's been 10 years that I've been trying to educate, advocate, make a policy change, all of that for the better of others.
That's amazing. And that's a really interesting way to look at it. I know we talk a lot about cancerversaries, but viewing it in the framework of it's been 10 years of me getting to advocate for this cause is a really, I don't think I've ever heard anyone frame it that way.
Yeah, I really want to give you guys a shout out. I mean, it is not easy to share your story. It is not easy to come forth and talk about symptoms that are often uncomfortable to talk about. We all know there's this stigma around colorectal cancer, right? And that has hindered awareness and education and early detection of this disease. But the both of you being out there sharing your story, speaking so openly about it is really helping to normalize conversations around that. So thank you both.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Because to be honest, I didn't start out this way. I was doing the exact same things that my parents and grandparents had done generationally, not sharing information, trying to be the strong mom, and not giving my children an opportunity to understand and fight themselves about cancer and not be afraid of it. And so when advocacy began for me, I understood what my new mission was, is to make them not afraid of cancer, that they can fight fight to live, and that they have options.
Amazing. Thank you. I was about to take it, but I did just get a question. I have such a difficult time with guilt that I have survived sometimes, especially when we are suffering so much loss. Can you share the ways you have gotten through these difficult times?
JJ, did you want to go first? Or?
Yeah, that is one of the hardest things, especially here this fall and stuff has been a really hard last couple months and many different, cancer circles that I'm in. A lot of amazing people have, passed away. And I say it's different with every person because you're always going to have a different relationship with every person that unfortunately does pass away. But I just try to remind myself that knowing them through the advocacy world, knowing them through like their own cancer journey has allowed me to see how they did their whole, cancer life and life with it. And I want to honor them as best as I can. And I know doing what we had done and keep doing the whole living the survivorship and advocacy and talking about it helps at times, but it's never going to help completely. As I said, it's going to be very fluid. Some days you're going to feel extremely guilty, or I know I do. And then some days I feel honored and proud that I'm still alive and still to keep fighting for them that aren't here anymore. And that's about as good as I can say because, as I said, survivor's guilt is one of the hardest things that I've ever had to deal with.
That is, I couldn't have put it much better myself. I think about 2 years ago when my brother passed away from metastatic late stage colorectal cancer. And I think, why did he pass away and yet I'm still here? None of us have questions to those kinds of answers, and they're, not blaming their lifestyles or who they are. And then with my brother, what was a little bit different is that he suffered from a mental illness most of his entire life. So add a mental illness on top of being diagnosed with a late stage cancer, and trying to figure out my own cancer journey, and then trying to be there for him as well, because you don't want them to be lonely or suffer. That's hard. And you're right, that's where the guilt comes in. But I believe if they were still here, they would want us to keep doing what we're doing, because they wouldn't want anyone to be suffering and pass away from something like this.
Absolutely. We actually just got a comment that kind of, I think, speaks to that a little bit. This says, for me, I use gratitude and think because I am still here, then I have a mission to share my story as much as possible. So kind of getting purpose from that sense of I'm still here while others may not be. So thank you for sharing and thank you for that question as well. I do want to take a second. You both mentioned getting involved, advocacy. Wenora, you mentioned by name, Count Me In. I do want to give Zoe a second to kind of explain, what is Count Me In? We're doing this webinar in partnership with them. So I want to give her just a second to kind of describe what that is, how people can get involved that are on this call, and just a general description and what it's all about.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you so much, Dr. Ng, Wenora, and JJ, for sharing your time and experience today. We really can't overstate enough how much we appreciate you and all the work you're doing. And thank you, Zach, and the Fight CRC team for partnering with Count Me In on this webinar. It's an honor to be here. So I'll share a bit more about the Colorectal Cancer Project and what it entails. I think some folks on the call have probably heard of it before, but in case it's new to you, we'll do an overview. So Count Me In is a research study of the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard that engages with patients, enabling them to accelerate cancer research by sharing their samples, their clinical information, and their voices. Count Me In has a few different projects or a few different focuses, one being the Colorectal Cancer Project. And this is a screenshot of the website where someone would join if they did want to do that. And that can be done at joincountmein.org/colorectal. And a cool thing about this project is that participation can be done from anywhere in the US or Canada. And it is open to anybody in the US or Canada with a colorectal cancer diagnosis, no matter what age you were diagnosed at. And so to take a look at what it entails to be part of this project, a participant would start on the website with a research consent form that gives more background on the study. And then the individual would tell Count Me In where they've been treated for their cancer. And we ask where they've been treated so that we can request medical records and, if relevant, archived tumor tissues. Step 3 is about responding to surveys about your cancer experience and sharing what your individual journey has been like. And then step 4, Count Me In sends a prepaid kit to collect a sample of your saliva and or blood. And then we study these samples to help improve our understanding of cancer. And also, some patients will receive a stool kit if they're willing to opt in and receive that kit. And then over time, Count Me In will provide participants with regular updates about the status of the research, sharing any discoveries that participants have enabled. So to review the 4 types of data that we're gathering, it's patient-reported surveys, clinical charts, sequencing data, and the lived experience. And so the CMI team analyzes and shares this de-identified data regularly via scientific platforms so that it can be harnessed by researchers everywhere to catalyze discoveries across cancer. And just a note of the sequencing part, because we're part of the Broad Institute, we have access to incredible genomic sequencing capabilities, which allows us to create these data sets. And I know it's always interesting to see where the data is going. And so here are a couple of examples of how researchers everywhere can access data generated by Count Me In's projects. So for example, we have CBio portal and the Genomic Data Commons as sources of data. And we invite you to connect with Count Me In online too. Count Me In has a really unique opportunity to increase awareness for our projects through social media, again, because anyone in the US or Canada can enroll from home, no matter where they live. And so we're active on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Threads, and X. And we also have a couple of social media channels in Spanish. So again, just wanted to say thank you to Fight CRC, JJ, Wenora, and Dr. Ng for being part of this. And if you have any specific questions about the Colorectal Cancer Project, you can learn more from info@colorectalcancerproject.org or by visiting our website. So thank you for letting me do a quick intro to Count Me In and the opportunity there.
Thank you, Zoe. I appreciate that. Sounds like it's a pretty straightforward way to get involved in research, which I know is daunting and confusing for most people, even those that are already in this cancer space. So I appreciate you telling us a little bit more about the project and joining us for this webinar. I do want to take a second. I'm going to open it up for questions here, but Dr. Ng, I know that you had another commitment at 12:45. So I did want to take a second and thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your experience, and really just, taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us in this webinar.
Thank you so much for having me. It really was an honor to be invited to participate today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let me get my screen set here. I am going to open it up for just general questions. If you have any questions for myself, for Zoe, for JJ, for Wenora, please feel free to ask. I have more questions to just keep conversation going, so bear with me as I continue asking questions. I do have a
Zach,
question. Yeah.
if you don't mind, could we also possibly talk about how the National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship has what they call their State of Survivorship survey too, that might be of interest to those who are interested about survivorship? What's the number one issue among patients is the direction that they receive from their physician, and that they rely on those doctors for their next form of treatment, for surveillance. I know I do. So I think that's a pretty good source as well.
Yeah, can you maybe fill us in a little bit for those of us that are unfamiliar with it?
Okay, so the National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship, or NCCS, actually has what they do every year is a call for patients, survivors, anyone who's had any kind of cancer, basically, though, to answer a few questions about cancer survivorship. And basically, what it does is it helps us understand what's on survivors' minds, what's most important to us. And in this case, if I look at like 2023, last year's, that number one thing, and I think through 2024, is still the patients relying on their physicians to guide them through this process. And so keeping that in mind when we are educating others and focusing awareness, letting them understand, individuals like us, the importance of self-advocacy, how important it's going to be able to speak up and tell our physicians and our primary care doctors what's going on in our lives so that they can help us.
Think that plug for self-advocacy, if I could just shout that from the rooftops, that your greatest advocate can be yourself, and nobody knows what you need if you don't tell them. So I think that's a really, really important point to drive home here. Advocate for yourself and the community at large, right? And this seems like a larger way to kind of step in and take action. I do have another question that just came in. Let me find it. So both for you, JJ and Wenora, do you have continued medical bills causing financial and or emotional stress?
Yeah, I think that's the one constant. And yet at the same time, I think about, if it wasn't for insurance, even though I have the co-pays and the other things, I wouldn't be here talking to you. So I guess I have to learn to take the good with the bad. I mean, I have a colonoscopy scheduled this coming Thursday. And the one phone call I wasn't expecting was, hey, this is the doctor's office calling, and your portion is going to be X, Y, and Z, and we need a deposit. And I'm like, what? Totally caught me off guard. And I'm like, okay, if I don't give you a deposit, does that mean you cancel my surgery? So yeah, there's the constant worries of something that for me is done yearly and keeps me alive, that I have to worry about. Yeah, the financial side of it can be daunting.
And yeah, for me, it's more of the because I'm on Medicaid, Medicare, it's more of just the issues of the state and what they're going to deny, what they're going to
Right.
accept, and if we're going to have to postpone treatments. I've had to change uh, a cancer center from my cancer center back to a HCA cancer infusion center before, because they weren't paying that because they could offer it cheaper. And that's just the total, you get used to your infusion nurses. So it's all just the stress of that is more what I have to constantly deal with, other than the medical bills.
JJ, do you find that that's impacted your care? Like changing
Uh,
systems and I mean,
Luckily, I knew a lot of the people that were at there, because years ago, that's the infusion center I started with before my oncologist built his own. So it didn't impact it much. It was just a lot more anxiety and stress because I got so used to the way they had done things, and then they do something different. And then with the just changes of, every year, every 2 years of the state government that controls the approval of whatever, it can be like, oh, we got to postpone this until you can get it approved through the Medicaid, Medicare. And So that's just the ongoing anxiety that keeps you up at night.
Wow, that anxiety of things so broad as government change every 2 years. I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
how
yeah.
you can't control that. How are you
No.
supposed
There's
to?
no control.
Geez, that's
So,
unreal.
so Zach, one of the things too I wanted to mention quickly about self-advocacy, at least for me, that's been really super important is my electronic healthcare record. I mean, for
Oh,
me, I've actually been able to, I can go back 6 or 7 years by looking at my test results and having access to my chart to, in a sense, almost diagnose or see if something's happening with my own body. And again, that's part of that self-advocacy work that we have to really, really encourage patients and others to use, because that's something that's a valuable asset. And then think about the clinical trials aspect of this, and where I was just at a meeting surrounding that. How can we get patients to be more aware of clinical trials? And we were like, put it in electronic healthcare records. If we decide that it's of interest, a lot of things can be tapped into right into that moment. Again, this is self-advocacy work at its best, taking care of yourself with the tools that they're giving us. I mean, we do it every day when we go to the grocery stores, when we go to various stores like Walmart, Target, we're self-checking out. We need to also self-check out for ourselves.
amazing. Thank you. I've got another question. How do you deal with scanxiety? And for people on the call that may not be familiar with the word scanxiety, that's anxiety related to upcoming scans, CTs, colonoscopies, any tests really, and anxiety that kind of surrounds that and what the results may or may not entail.
Yeah, that's a complicated question or answer and everything. As I said, it's going to be different for everybody. I go to my doctor and I get a refill of my anxiety medications for sure. But also just talking about it to people that understand, people in the community here that know what you're talking about when you say scanxiety and don't look at you like you're crazy and making up words of that somebody that's never had to deal with it.
Sure.
And I think that's just the best way. And I'm 9 years in and have scans every 3 months, and I still deal with it just as much, or if not more, than I did 8 years ago. So I know that's probably not what certain people want to hear, but
No, it's
for me, it's the truth and it's real, and it's just you learn to try to do
Yeah.
things that make it better, and then hopefully get to enjoy the results later on.
Yeah. And this is where, again, speaking up, have someone come with you so that at least you've got some kind of support system in place, that you're not trying to do all this by yourself. Don't try to be the superhero of your own story. It's too much pressure, it's too hard. It's okay to ask for help or to lean on someone else.
thank you. Kind of a general question here. So survivorship generally takes a great deal of acceptance of your situation that you found yourself in, everything. It sounds like both you, Wenora, and JJ have found it. How did you find it, and what's that been like?
I think that's a constant path that we're going on, because today I feel like I have pretty good acceptance. But if you'd have talked to me probably Saturday night when I was in, a spiral or something, you'd been like, he hasn't accepted a thing yet. So it's and I know I say that a lot, but it's just every day's different in this, survivorship. It's something can trigger you, something can make you remember, what you've been through or what you still have to go through. And I think just accepting that and accepting that you can do as good as you can that day. And, acceptance isn't measured in how good you're doing overall. It's how good you're doing in that moment is kind of where I, have found my peace at.
Yeah. And for me, it's been a little bit different. I love music. I love quotes. I used a lot of quotes. I put them all over my wall at one point. Quotes of encouragement, and that to not change my mindset about being a survivor. I think about Kelly Clarkson's song "Stronger." What doesn't kill you it makes you stronger. And so the fight to want to live as long as you can live. It's just so important. It's ingrained in all of us. It's naturally there, but sometimes it has to be pushed or pulled a little bit out of. And so I want to be that example, or try to encourage others to take that extra step, to keep that strength going, to be stronger when you can. You don't have to always be, you don't have to pretend, but it goes a long way.
Thank you. Have either of you dealt with somebody on your care team, a physician retiring and having to completely, JJ, I know you kind of mentioned bouncing back and forth between places, but have you ever had somebody that you were very involved with and very
Yeah.
trusted as part of your care retire?
Yeah, 2 years ago, this December, my, oncologist that I moved he opened his own treatment centers, I moved with him, and so he retired because he had been doing it for 40 years, and I had to he's the one that voluntarily put me in contact with people at Duke that got me on the clinical trial that saved my life, so he was open to all that. He's the reason that I even looked for those second and third options when everything was going bad. And so he handpicked my replacement, which is he's been great too, but it's different. And
Sure.
then a year ago, my infusion nurse who did probably about 130 of my chemo infusions, she retired. So it's just I got it on kind of both ends, and it's hard to deal with because you get so used to
Mhm.
how they operate and they know you so well. Like my oncologist could come in there and he could look at me and tell if something was wrong, or like if I was having a good day or a bad day. And he knew how I related to, I'm not one that's going to complain about like pain and all that to him, but he could tell everything there. So it's just getting that, familiarity with the new people. And it was definitely one of the harder things that I've had to do.
Yeah. And change is constant and hard.
Absolutely.
Not easy at all. I mean, I've experienced the same thing. And just this past year, believe it or not, I've for the past year and a half, I've been in a clinical trial. And then all of a sudden the PI is no longer with the clinical trial. And I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? What does that mean for me? Does that mean there's something that's so valuable that this information, and right on the cusp as this, do we lose all of that? So yeah, there's the constant anxiety of that, and hoping, um, I and I guess this is where faith comes in too, the assured expectation of things, not seen, and hope for. So it keeps you on your toes, that's for sure. And I guess to not give up.
That's amazing. Thank you both so much. I do want to take a second just to remind anybody that may be watching, if you have reached the point of follow-up care, if you've been diagnosed with cancer and you've moved kind of into survivorship and what most people would probably typically consider it, like you're at the point of follow-up care, maybe not actively in treatment, the importance of a survivorship care plan and discussing what that looks like with your providers. It can help outline managing your care after, you've gone through months, years, possibly of active treatment, intensive treatment, very close surveillance. It kind of helps outline that. I'm going to put a link in the chat that can help you develop a survivorship care plan if you haven't discussed that with your provider, if they haven't brought it up with you. It can be a good tool to use and can spark some good conversation between you and your care team moving forward into survivorship. So look for that link in the chat. Everyone should be able to see that. We are nearing the very end of it. We've got about 2 minutes left. We got a question earlier. Somebody asked how they could get involved with Fight CRC, and I read your mind. So how do you get involved with CRC? There's a few ways. Many of them involve me, many of them do not. So first off, we have a program called a Resource Champions program. Twice a year, we send out large mailings of resources that we offer to anybody that wants them, with the expectation that you take those resources, you get in the community with them, you give them to your physician's office, you take them to health fairs, but generally just work to raise awareness about colorectal cancer, screening ages, risk factors, anything and everything like that. It's a really great way to get involved. It's not an everyday thing. It's a twice a year. We release them when we release our Beyond Blue magazine. So we've got about 350 resource champions right now. We'd love to join you. I will include links for all these in my follow-up email after this recording is up to anyone registered. So you can also register for one of our numerous in-person events. Coming up in 3 months is our big, I'd call it our flagship event, which is Call on Congress. We go to Washington, D.C., we plant 27,400 flags on the National Mall to represent early age onset people that'll die by 2030 who've been diagnosed with colorectal cancer. We meet with lawmakers, we lobby, well, not lobby, but we go and we ask for change. We work actively for change, and we advocate for this community. So if you're interested, you can register for Call in Congress. Check it out on our website. You can apply to be a RAT. If you saw in the Q&A panel I had up, we actually had Wenora there as a RAT in a lab. It's our research advocacy training and support program. Those applications open at different times, and that's a way, if you're ready to really get involved in the research space, that's an interesting way to get involved. I'm sure Wenora could speak to that and what that involves, but that's an entirely different discussion. If you are ready to get activated and ready to be an advocate, really go to town for Fight CRC. You can apply to our ambassador program. We open this up every year. We take anywhere 10 to 20 ambassadors every year, and you really are at the front lines of advocacy. You'll do interviews for us, you work for us, not in the employee sense, but you really are hand in hand with all of our advocacy efforts. You can request resources to distribute for awareness, health fairs, or other events. No reason needed. Feel free. shop.fightcrc.org. We'll get you resources. They're all free. They're all medically reviewed. And always feel free to reach out to Fight CRC about any volunteer opportunities. We would love to have you sign up. We'd love to get you as a volunteer. We'd love to help you help this community. So if you're ever interested in getting involved, Fight CRC is here. Count me in. You get involved in the Count Me In program if you can. I do like to end these webinars with our mission statement. Our mission: we fight to cure colorectal cancer and serve as relentless champions of hope for all affected by this disease through informed patient support, impactful policy change, and breakthrough research endeavors. I want to take a second to thank JJ, Wenora, Zoe, Dr. Ng, who's no longer here, but thank you all so much for joining us on this. JJ, Wenora, thank you so much for sharing your personal stories, taking the time to field these questions. I know this is very personal, and it can be a lot, so we really appreciate you taking the time. Zoe and everyone at Count Me In, thank you so much for partnering with us and joining us on this webinar. I think it was great, and yeah, I look forward to more of these in the future. So thank you, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you again.